The most common mistake that recruiters make at all levels is asking questions ineffectively. Asking questions theoretically is good, but when you ask them poorly, they're, if anything, counterproductive. So, what I want to do is break down exactly what makes questions effective, what makes questions work, so that they sparkle and give you the information that you're really looking for. The easiest way of explaining the distinction here is, I guess, to refer to something that will seem a little bit off subject, which is hypnosis. Hypnosis, neurolinguistic programming, the work of Tony Robbins, Paul McKenna, Darren Brown. Yes, I just called Tony Robbins a hypnotist, for such he is. Most people see somebody doing a Darren Brown trick, doing a Paul McKenna hypnosis induction, seeing somebody doing a Tony Robbins seminar, and all they see is the highlight reel. What they don't see is everything that goes before the highlight reel, the lead up to, or what technically is known as the setup. So let me give you an example. If you're doing a hypnosis induction, if you're talking to somebody prior to actually creating a hypnotic induction, the important part of what happens before you go into any kind of hypnotic induction is what happens before it. So I've mentioned previously that there are 4 stages to a question, which is setup, question, response, follow-up. Setup, question, response, follow-up. And if all you focus on is the question, you're missing the biggest and most fundamental part of everything that goes with communication. Because there's an expression I want you to think about very hard and just keep in the forefront of your minds, which is the meaning of communication is the response you get. So if you think that you're asking somebody an open question to get information from them, but what you actually get back is, I don't know really, or something half-hearted or minimal amounts of information from them, that means that the question you asked was ineffective. It doesn't matter how well written it was. It doesn't matter how open it was, how, what, why, where, when, who. If the response you get from somebody is half-hearted or not terribly effusive or doesn't give you a lot of information, that means that the question you asked didn't work. And the reason it didn't work was almost always, not 100% of the time, but 99.99% of the time, it's because you either didn't set it up at all or the setup wasn't effective. So I mentioned hypnosis earlier. I'll give you 2 examples. If you're doing a hypnotic induction with somebody, it's not the part where you get somebody to put their hand up and sit there like that, or eat an onion thinking it's an orange. That isn't the hypnosis part. The hypnosis part is what happens from the moment you say hello or the moment they walk into a theatre and you start talking. Everything that happens from hello or everything that happens from them walking to their seat is part of the hypnosis process. Darren Brown doesn't randomly get people to select a number or choose a headline out of today's newspaper or whatever it is that he's doing. Everything that leads up to that point, the signage in the venue's lobby, the seat numbering, pictures and art on the walls, everything, every word that he says is designed to create an outcome later. Strictly speaking, if you ever attend a Tony Robbins Unleash the Power Within weekend, you're conscious of Tony inviting you to go walk on fire at midnight. And if there's 10,000 people there, 9,500 of them will walk on fire just because Tony Robbins asks them to. And that's not because he's particularly good at asking people to walk on fire, though he is. It's nothing to do with the state work that he does immediately beforehand, where he's got people really pumped up and really hyped and feeling really buoyant and excited and boisterous and full of, this. That's not it. What does it is the 4 hours of session that goes beforehand, where Tony is hammering in the messages, he's hammering home the messages, the thought processes, the beliefs that you need to have to trust a stranger that walking on fire is a good idea. So it's not the 10 minutes before the firewalk, it's not the half hour before the firework, it's the 4 or 5 hours before the firework that everybody thinks is just part of the entertainment. It's not. The setup is what makes Tony Robbins events works. The setup is what makes a Darren Brown entertainment work. The setup is what makes a great recruiter's questions work. So let's take a simple question. Let's say that we're talking to a prospect rather than a candidate. We're talking to somebody who potentially is going to give us a vacancy to work. What kind of question are we looking for? Well, let's take a fairly generic, fairly standard question. We're probably going to want to say to them, what are you looking for in a recruitment partner? Let's keep it very generic, very open. What are you looking for? Well, how, what, why, where, when, who? So what are you looking for is an open question. I guarantee you, though, if you're just having a conversation with somebody and you randomly say to them, so what are you looking for in a recruitment partner? They'll go, oh, well, we're paying 14% and we do this and we do that. You just get nothing, or you get what they think they're supposed to say, or you get the same thing that they've said to the last 5 people they've spoken to. Because people run on autopilot almost all the time. Almost everything that we do as human beings is done on autopilot. We work on what's technically known as judgmental heuristics and behavioral heuristics. Let me give you an example of that. Just put your hands together for a second. Yeah, about this far apart. I'm not going to stay to distance because, yes, I'm a bloke. So about that far apart, put your hands together, interlace your fingers, and see what happens to your thumbs. Now, some of you will have your right thumb on top, and some of you will have your left thumb on top, and some of you will have your thumbs side by side. I used to go into this whole shtick about how people with their right thumbs on top were more logical and numerically based, and they tended to be more successful in their careers. And people with their left thumb on top were more emotional and passionate and made better lovers. And it doesn't matter. There is no significance to it whatsoever. It's just that. Okay? But try this. If you're a righty, put your left thumb on top. If you're a lefty, put your right thumb on top. And if you're a side by side, just put something on top. Okay? And I'm betting that however you've done that, it feels just a little bit weird. Give you another example. Fold your arms for a second. Just fold your arms, being careful with the microphone. Fold your arms and have a look down. You're either right on top or left on top. Those are your two choices. Now swap over. Put the other arm on top. I can't see everyone, but I suspect that a decent number of you aren't doing that. You're kind of going, I don't know. You're kind of doing a John Travolta impersonation of night fever, night fever. Left arm, right arm. Incidentally, it took me about 6 months to learn how to do that without a lot of effort, because I devoted my time to learning the most bizarre stuff. But as far as I know, there's no evolutionary advantage to whether it's a left arm or a right arm on top. Incidentally, it's got nothing to do with being left-handed or right-handed, because on that basis, ambidextrous people would just kind of do this. It's got nothing to do with anything. What it's got to do with is habit. Somehow or other, you developed a habit for which thumb goes on top, which arm goes on top, and all sorts of other things. You ever walked up to a door and pushed it, and it hasn't opened? So you pushed it, and it still hasn't opened. So you really pushed it and started rattling it. And then, and only then, have you seen this massive sign at eye height that says, pull? Well, were you temporarily blind? No. You were running on autopilot. It was a behavioral heuristic. It's a habit, in more simplistic terms. Whatever you do 3 or 4 times, if it's not particularly important, and whatever you do works, you'll tend to keep doing it. Obviously, if it's mission critical or life threatening, then you'll think about it more frequently, you'll think about it more deeply. But if it doesn't really matter, like whether you push or pull a door, if it doesn't really matter about, when you get in the car, do you put your keys in the ignition first? and then put your seatbelt on, or is it seatbelt then ignition? Doesn't really matter that much as long as you do your seatbelt up. But you'll do one or the other. You'll either do your seatbelt first, you'll do your ignition first, or some variation on that theme. There'll be a sequence in which you do things, and when you don't follow that sequence, it feels a bit weird. Now, think about it. If you've developed a habit that feels really weird to break, like right arm or left arm on top, right thumb, left thumb on top, if you've developed a habit for that, what are the chances that a prospect might have developed a habit for the key questions that every supplier asks? Well, I would suggest that they are massively likely to do that, because almost every recruiter will ask some variation of, what are you looking for in a recruiter? Pretty much every candidate will ask, what are you looking for in a candidate? That becomes like hitting the play button. And what comes next is autopilot. It's not even thought about. They will replay what they've said the last half dozen times, what the agreed corporate line is, what they think they ought to say, what they think will make them sound good, what they think that you want to hear. There's all sorts of different flavors of autopilot, but it amounts to the same thing. It amounts to, you ask a question that they've heard dozens of times before in variations and different flavors, and they press play and they talk back to you, and the eyes are open, the mouth moves, but Mr. Brain has long since departed. So you're not really having a conversation with them. You're having a conversation with their habits and their automated behaviors. The setup before a question is designed to blow all those behaviors out of the water and get somebody to actually engage with you, to actually, think. That's the objective of the setup stage. So setup, question, response, follow-up. Let's talk about the setup. The question, I'm going to assume, you being intelligent and trained people, you're probably familiar with how, what, why, where, when, who. Those are your open questions. But let's look at the setup. And what I'm suggesting is that there are 3 potential elements to a setup. You don't have to use them all every time. In fact, if you did use them all every time, you'd sound like an idiot. But they are the key tools that are available. There's others, but I'm not going to get into them because they're quite niche and quite specialized. So the 3 most common setup tools or setup techniques are a summary, an inoculation, and then a priming or a focus phrase. Priming phrase, focus phrase, they're exactly the same thing. We're just using slightly different terminology for each one. Okay? First, let's start with a summary. If you summarize back what somebody said to you, or if you summarize back the conversation, or if you summarize back what's happened up to this point, then by definition, it's true. And I don't mean paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is I find paraphrasing quite rude, to be honest, because paraphrasing is taking what somebody said and turning it into what they would have said if they were as clever as you. And that's a bit offensive, quite frankly. Patronizing at best, downright offensive at worst. So, I mean, summarize accurately. No spin, no angle, no wish fulfillment, just genuine. Summarize back what they've said, summarize back what you've said, summarize back the history, summarize back what's gone on. And if you summarize back accurately, it's true. And if it's true, somebody's going to be agreeing with you. And the more they agree with you, the more likely they are to agree with you. And also, from the basis of rapport, people who are like each other tend to like each other. So if somebody's nodding away as you're talking, you're building rapport, you're building agreement, and the more somebody agrees with you, the more likely they are to keep agreeing with you. So simply summarizing back builds a lot of rapport, builds a lot of agreement, and makes it much easier, much more likely that somebody's actually going to give you real information when you ask an open question. Particularly if you use one of the secret weapons of influence, which is the word because. There's a wonderful piece of research done at Harvard in the late 70s, looked at the power of causal linkage, and it looked at different ways of asking somebody to do something. And if you look up Harvard photocopier behavioral science on Google, you'll find the original research paper. And essentially, this was back when there were queues at photocopies, because photocopies were enormous and massively expensive, so there weren't many of them. So what the researchers did was find a photocopier with a queue. They'd walk up to the front of the queue and they'd say, "Excuse me, can I cut in because I'm late for a lecture? I've got to get these copied or I'm going to be in big trouble." You give somebody a good reason. And the majority of people, from memory, I think it was about 92% of people, would let you in. They'd just let you take a couple of copies. Just because, most people will ask you, if you've got a good reason, most people will be reasonable. If you then go to the front of the queue and you say, "Excuse me, can I cut in?" What's interesting is that the majority of people will still let you. It's still over 80% of people will let you. And yes, this isn't cultural, it isn't dependent on geography or nationality or language. It's pretty generic every time it's been tested. But here's where the fun comes in. If you say to somebody, "Excuse me, can I cut in because I have to make some copies?" So it's about 92% if you have a really good reason. It's about 90% if you have no reason whatsoever, but use the word because. So the power of the reason isn't the reason, it's the word because. Because in English, it implies causal linkage. If this is true, this makes sense. If this is true, I should comply. So put the because in there. So summarize back and say to somebody, because of that, what I'd like to ask is, then ask the question. Because of that, let me just ask. Because of that, what are you really looking for in a recruitment partner? What are you looking for in a recruitment firm? That simple summary will make it far more likely that you'll get interest and buy-in and engagement to their answer. That's the first one, which is a summary. The second is an inoculation. I used to have to explain this quite hard, but after COVID, we're all now very familiar with inoculations, vaccinations. A psychological inoculation works exactly the same way as a viral or bacterial inoculation. What you do is you give somebody a very weak version or inert version of the virus, and instead of getting the full-blown symptoms, they just get a runny nose, a sore throat, sniffles, maybe a couple of days of aches and pains. They don't get the full-blown disease. A psychological inoculation is precisely the same. You give somebody a weak version of a potential objection. So if you've tested your questions, which I encourage you to do, and you know that at a certain point people are quite likely to go or push back or give you some kind of negative response, you can inoculate against it. So, for example, you might, if people tell you that that's a bit pushy, the inoculation would be, "Well, I know this might be a bit pushy. Let me just ask you." Or if the pushback is, "That's a slightly odd question," the inoculation will be, "I know this might be a slightly strange question." And then you ask the question anyway. So all you're doing is acknowledging the potential objection, acknowledging the potential pushback, then asking the flipping question anyway. That way, people are far more likely to respond. I know it sounds bizarre, but it does work. Like that, for example. I know it sounds bizarre. It's an inoculation against anybody thinking, "Well, that sounds bizarre," but it does work. So if you rewind what we've just been doing, you'll find that I've been inoculating like crazy all the way through everything from hello forwards. Because what I'm trying to do is to minimize the pushback or resistance or objections to what I'm saying, to the points I'm making, so that it's easier for you to agree with me and easier for you to buy into the message I'm presenting. It's exactly the same with me trying to set up a question. So with a simple question like, I say simple, it's simple when you do it right, but you'd be amazed how often a question like, "What are you looking for in a recruiter?" gets, "I don't know really," or some variation on that, back from very intelligent, very articulate, and very senior people come back and respond with, no, really. So the setup to that, or the inoculation that I often include prior to that question, because the setup comes obviously before the question. So you can't inoculate after you've said something. If you try to inoculate after you've said something, that's either objection handling or it's trying to mitigate saying the wrong stuff. An inoculation comes before. Same as you can't have an inoculation after you've got flu. You have to have the inoculation before you get the flu. Same with a psychological inoculation. So when I'm talking to a prospect and I'm trying to sell my recruitment services, what I will often say is, I know this sounds like a sort of generic salesy question. Let me just ask, and then I'll go on and ask the question anyway. I know this is something you've probably talked about a lot, and then I'll ask the question anyway. Now, you can inoculate against 2 or 3 different things. So I could say, I know this might sound a bit salesy, and you probably answered this hundreds of times anyway, but I would never inoculate against every potential objection, because you'd end up there for 15 minutes and you'd sound like an idiot. So I will just take a couple of key objections, maybe 1, maybe a couple, at most 3. I've never done more than that. And then I will ask the question anyway. So you can summarize and put an inoculation. It's not either or, you can do both. And you can use a focus phrase or a priming phrase. Okay? There is a slight semantic difference. A focus phrase takes somebody from thinking of the subject and takes them down to this particular aspect of the subject. A priming phrase gets them to think about that particular aspect of the subject in a particular way. So let me give you an example. You can tie this together with inoculations, by the way. So when I used to be heavily involved in insurance, commercial insurance, both as a trainer of commercial insurance brokers, but also recruiting for recruitment for commercial insurance, one of the key questions was, other than just looking at premium, which I'll happily come to, and yes, we'll need to talk about the premium, the insurance premium, what else is important for you? So the question is, what else is important for you? The priming phrase is other than, or priming and inoculation is other than the premium, which is important, and we'll come to it in a second. What else is important for you? And that took people from going premium to, oh, well, I need to make sure I'm covered for this, and I'm covered for that, and we're going to be doing this in the future. I need to make sure that. So it massively opens people up. So a priming phrase or focus phrase as a recruiter, just as an example, might be other than simply finding great candidates, what else is important for you in a recruiter? Oh, I don't know. And then you're off into a conversation. A focus phrase is, to give you an example, if I ask you to tell me about a subject in a book and you've not read the book, that's not going to be a very productive conversation. If, on the other hand, I say to you, hey, have a read of this chapter, have a read of chapter 3, and just summarize it back for me, or have a read of chapter 3 and tell me what you think. Now you can have a conversation about it. Or if I say, hey, what happened with this case? What happened with this situation? You go, oh, no, really? I say, hey, here's the file with all the notes in it. Have a read back of that, and then just tell me what you think happened. Tell me what you remember. So what I'm doing is opening up somebody's filing cabinet, pulling out a particular file, giving them that file to read, and then asking them about what's in that file, as opposed to just saying, hey, what's in that file? And they go, I don't even know what file you're talking about. So focus phrase. Let me give you an example. Just think about your career for a second. Focus phrase. In an ideal world, over the next 3 years or so, If you couldn't fail, if you knew that you were going to achieve your goals, what would your goals be over the next 3 years or so? Now, think about what I just said. Looking forward over the next, in terms of your career, in terms of your goals, that's focus. Looking forward over the next 3 years or so, that's focus. If you knew that you couldn't fail, that's an inoculation. What would you say you want to achieve? Open question. So, what I can do is string all this together. And by using focus phrases, I can get you to think about just about anything before I ask you about it. And if you thought about the subject before I ask you about the subject, then by definition, it's much easier for you to give me genuinely rich, engaged answers. And that's the objective. So if I say to you, just thinking back over the last couple of years, there'll be some stuff that went well. There'll be some stuff that went, not quite so well. There'll be some stuff that maybe was a bit sticky. Okay, well, bearing all that in mind, from where you are now over the next couple of years, what would be a great outcome for you? Or if you think back over the last couple of years, there'll be some stuff that wasn't great, some stuff that was a bit, some stuff that was pretty sticky. Looking forward over the next couple of years, what would you ideally like to achieve? Or some stuff that wasn't great, some stuff that was meh, some stuff that was horrible. What's important for you over the next 3 years? What's important for you to make sure that doesn't happen again? What's important for you to make sure that you get the kind of results that you really want? That's how I'm using a focus phrase to deliberately control what you focus on. Let me give you another analogy. Please don't do this if you're in the car and you've got this on your speakers, but if you're sitting in a room or in the privacy of your own head or whatever it may be, just have a look around you and have a look around and spot all the things you can that are blue. Blue, 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 blue. Now, if you're like most people, you've probably found some things that are kind of a bluey grey, but you're calling them blue because you want to feel successful. And there'll be some things that are kind of aquamarine, but I'm going to call them blue because they're not quite green. Okay, now close your eyes for a second. Hence, don't do this while you're driving. Close your eyes for a second and just remember all the things you can that are brown. Oh, you pig. What have you done that to me for? Okay, now, you probably can't remember because you were focusing on the blue things, but open your eyes up, have a look around, and you're going to find brown stuff everywhere. And a lot of you will be looking at beige and going, it's brown. I'm going to call it brown. You'll be looking at it kind of off grey, and you're going to go, yeah, it's probably taupe, but I'm going to call it brown because, Now, here's the thing. In this life, if you go through life looking for blue, you'll find blue. If you go through life looking for brown, you'll find brown everywhere. Yeah? The situation, the room has not changed, but what you focused on changed just because I asked you to look for different colors. The same is true of every situation. If you're going to bring me on board as a recruiter for your business, and I just ask you about what you're looking for in a recruiter, you'll go, I want low fees, I want good candidates, I want quick response. Maybe a couple of other things, but basically that. Okay. Let me ask you a question. I mean, obviously, when you're working with a recruiter, the fees are important. The quality of the candidates is clearly going to be important. And in all circumstances, you're going to want good communication response. I accept all that. But just thinking about the way you've recruited over the past couple of years, there'll have been some stuff that was terrific. There'll have been some recruitment experiences that were a bit, they were all right. And there have probably been some recruitment experiences that were a bit horrible or just didn't work for you. Yeah. Okay. So bearing all those in mind, other than price, quality of candidates, when you're looking to work with a new recruiter, what's really important, do you think, for getting the best people in the best way for your business? What really matters? The question I asked is what really matters. The rest of it was set up. And I guarantee you, if you ask some kind of setup like that, you will get a far more engaged, far richer answer from somebody than you would do from simply saying, what are you looking for from a recruiter? What do you want from a recruitment partner? What do you want from a recruitment firm? If you just ask that with no setup, you'll get meh. Of course you will, because they haven't thought about the subject before you've asked them about the subject. So the general rule of thumb is short setup, long question, short answer. That's the mistake most people make, by the way. They do little or no setup, and then they ask a question that's 4 sentences long with 18 subclauses in it. It's a medium-sized paragraph. Yeah, people don't know how to answer that, so they don't really try. They just give you the shortest answer they can get away with without sounding rude. And sometimes they don't even bother not sounding rude. The key is long setup, short question, long answer. So when I'm in a genuine sales situation, when I'm genuinely talking with a candidate or I'm talking with a prospect, some of my setups, if you actually wrote them down, they'd be half a page of A4 handwritten, sometimes more, because I want to make sure that I've covered everything before I ask the question. I've summarized the situation, I've inoculated against reasons why they might not answer, and I've focused them and primed them to give me the right information in the right way. So when I ask the question, what are you looking for? What's important to you? What matters? I will get genuine, in-depth, engaged answers back. That's what works. Summary, inoculation, focus phrase, or priming phrase. If you can practice those 3 elements, and you can make it easy for somebody to give you a comprehensive answer. The easier it is to give you good answers, the better the answers that you'll get. Sounds obvious, but you'll be amazed how common it is for common sense to not be common practice. So think about those 3 elements, play around with them a bit. What are the most common objections? What are the reasons why people don't answer you? How can you inoculate against them? What do they need to think about before they can give you a really comprehensive answer? If somebody needs to think about the future, then specifically get them to think about the future. Looking forward over the next 12 to 18 months. The most common phrases I use for priming phrases or focus phrases are looking forward, looking back. Pretty much anything that comes after that, the moment I say to you, looking forward, your brain's gone there. I then just have to give it a subject and a timescale. So looking forward over the next 18 months in terms of your career goals, looking forward over the next 3 years in terms of your financial ambitions. I bet that you're doing just that. I bet that you're looking forward over the next 3 years about your financial ambitions. Well, if you weren't, you are now. Equally, if I had looking back over the last couple of years, and your brain is now scouting around, hunting around, pecking around, looking for subjects because I haven't given it a focus yet. Looking back over the last couple of years, there'll be some stuff that you think, yeah, that was really good. That was great. There'll also be some stuff that you think, that could have gone better. Now that's generally pretty focused, but I can do better. If I say to you, looking back over the last couple of years in your work life, now we're really focused. There'll be some stuff you think, yeah, I did that. That was great. There'll be some other stuff you think, that could have gone a lot better. By the way, you'll notice that looks like I'm play acting. That could have gone a lot better. Yeah, I am. I am kind of play acting. I'm just making it meaningful. I'm emoting what I want you to feel. That makes it easier for you to get into that particular memory. Hence the mention of Tony Robbins, hence the mention of Darren Brown, hence the mention of hypnosis stuff right at the start of this call. Because if you attend a Tony Robbins seminar, I recommend it for everyone, by the way. If you've never done it, do it. I think he's in Cologne in Europe this year. He's doing gigs in the States as well. Tony Robbins doesn't get people to feel excited and motivated and pumped up. Tony Robbins is motivated and pumped up. Tony Robbins is motivation. He is there. Yeah. So if I'm trying to get you to think about things that are a little bit uncomfortable, I'll feel a little bit uncomfortable while I'm asking you about it. If I'm asking you about things that went really, really well, my tone of voice delivers that memory for you, makes it easy. If I go, think about things that went really well, there'll have been some things that were absolutely fabulous, and you look back at them and go, yeah, I'm proud of that. That was brilliant. And there's some other stuff that was a bit, not great, but, that isn't connecting the words with the meaning. It's not connecting the words with the emotion. So you're probably not buying into the question. You're probably not buying into the setup in the same way as you would if I emote it, if I project the emotion. So the setup has three phases: summary, inoculation, focus phrase. You can mix those in whatever sequence you like. Personally, I always finish with a focus phrase. That's just me. You can literally use them in any order. You can mix them, you can go backwards and forwards with them, but those are your three options: summary, inoculation, focus phrase. Then comes the question: how, what, why, where, when, who. But what do you do in the focus phrase? Sell it, emote it. If you're talking about what would be really exciting, if you're talking about what would be fabulous, if you're talking about what would make them a lot of money and make their life so much easier, emote it. It makes it work so much better. It's not obligatory, but go there first. It makes it all so much more exciting, so much more interesting for all concerned, and it works a hell of a lot better. It's not in the rules, but it does make everything work better. So that's the setup, followed by the questions, followed by the response. During the response phase, listen, look, smell what they're telling you. As much sensory information as you can take in, take it in. And then there's the follow-up. And the follow-up is going to be next session, where I explain what happens once they've answered the question as fully as possible. And the follow-up is what turns an interrogation into a conversation. And it means that people will keep talking to you as often as you want to call them, as often as you want to have Zoom calls with them, because they're engaged in a conversation with another human being and they're talking about the most interesting thing in the world, which is them. As long as the other person is talking about themselves, their goals, their ambitions, their business, their future, what they want and what they want to avoid, they will happily have that conversation as often as you like, in as much detail and for as long as you like, because it's the most fascinating and exciting subject on earth. You are the most interesting person to you. They are the most interesting person to them. That's the way the world works, my friends. So bear those three things in mind. They'll be in the notes underneath the video as well, for you to refer to later. Summarize, inoculate, focus phrase or priming phrase. Drop me a note with any question you've got and I'll get back to everything I can as quickly as I can.